Outside, the wind howled as if it were trying to tear apart every pane of reinforced glass atop the Phoenix Skyview terminal dome. Snow didn't fall gently like petals. It came sideways, like streaks of white fire slamming into the ground with the fury of some invisible force. The weather report called it a Category 2 blizzard. But inside Terminal C, no one cared about classifying nature anymore. They just wanted to leave, or at least find a place untouched by flashing red signs that screamed, "Cancelled." The loudspeakers repeated their lines with robotic indifference. Flight 217 to Newark has been cancelled. We apologize for the inconvenience. Attention passengers, please check monitors for updated gate information. Above, the digital displays no longer looked like sources of information, but backdrops to disappointment. Each new update felt like a verdict. Travelers slumped in cold metal chairs or curled up between charging stations, suitcases for pillows, jackets over legs. Children sobbed softly. Adults grumbled through gritted teeth. No one had patience left. And no one knew something else, far greater, was quietly moving toward them. Another gust of cold air rushed in as the revolving doors spun open. A sharp wind screamed through, scattering receipts and lifting a red scarf high into the air. A child stumbled. An elderly woman clung to the wall, trembling. Everything was chaotic, but not yet out of control. Not yet. In the southeast corner of the terminal where the international concourse met the domestic baggage claim, a ceiling floodlight cast a pale white glare. That area seemed quieter, but it was exactly where the storm would begin. Because in that very spot, the first breath of an irrational act was about to rise, and it would turn the entire airport upside down. From above, Phoenix Skyview looked like a shattered beehive, every chamber buzzing with noise. The drag of suitcase wheels, bursts of static on ground crew radios, frantic typing from someone trying to meet a deadline already lost. And then, just as one of the overhead fluorescents flickered unexpectedly over a row of empty seats, no one noticed that the real storm wasn't out there. It was waiting inside. At the end of the hallway, past a door marked Authorized Personnel Only, a woman adjusted her uniform collar and smoothed the creases on her nameplate. The silver badge read, A. Hale, DHS Behavioral Unit. Officer Annika Hale wasn't someone who drew attention in a crowd. She wasn't tall. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't fit the stereotype of a hardened female federal officer. But her eyes, that quiet, gray intensity, could cause anyone to reset their tone after just one glance. Not because of authority, but because of presence. She walked with slow, steady steps, radiating a calm that bordered on absolute. But those who truly knew Annika understood. Behind that walk was a past not easily put into words. A year in Afghanistan, a burial alive almost, a moment when giving up seemed the only option. And then, from the rubble, a creature appeared, eyes of gold-tinged brown fur streaked with dust and blood, breathing fast but unyielding. That dog had dragged her from death how she never fully remembered. Only that, by dawn, they were rescued together. That dog now walking beside her was named Riven, a male German shepherd with a tight, powerful frame and an unwavering gaze that swept each corner of the hallway. Across his back, a black canine harness bore not the typical labels no explosives, no narcotics. Instead, bold letters read, Behavioral Response, Child Protection. Not many understood Riven's role. He didn't sniff out drugs. He didn't chase suspects. He was trained to do what no machine could, detect anomalies in the way humans interact with children. How a child flinched. How a mother failed to hold her baby the right way. How a sentence didn't match the look in someone's eyes. Annika had seen dozens of K-9s go through the program. But only Riven passed the final test. standing amid 10 simulated crises and choosing the exact moment to act without command. They didn't need many words. A brush of fingers, a shared glance, a sigh, enough for Riven to understand. It's time. Riven had once been a soldier, so had Annika. But now, more than anything, they were survivors, carrying within them the ability to sense pain before it made a sound. Right now, Riven walked calmly by her side. His ears were alert, his nose twitching slightly with each current of air, but his body remained in waiting mode. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He showed nothing. Not yet. Just like Annika. He was waiting for the right moment. Because if you've survived war, you learn one truth. Danger doesn't always growl. Sometimes it whispers, like a lullaby. Annika and Riven stepped out through the staff door and into the chaos of the terminal, an uneasy current of passengers flowing between rows of weary chairs. The air was cold, not just from the overloaded ventilation system, but from something less visible. The chilling absence of control. The loudspeakers no longer served as mere announcements. They cut through conversations like sirens. A man shouted at a gate agent over his third delay. A couple argued loudly about renting a car to drive across states. Children cried, some from hunger, some from exhaustion, and some simply because they could sense something was wrong and didn't know how to name it. Security personnel rushed back and forth, but their eyes had dulled, movements mechanical. No one had the bandwidth to truly observe. No one except Riven. He began to slow down, not from fatigue, but because something had shifted. Annika noticed immediately. She gave the leash a subtle tug, not to guide him forward, but to signal, "I'm listening." Riven didn't respond right away. His ears twitched, then perked toward a line of chairs near the security checkpoint. No unusual sounds, no shouting, no physical conflict. And yet Annika could feel it, too. Something was off. A tremor in the atmosphere, not of sound, but of presence, as if something was being suppressed. She glanced at her watch. Not yet a shift change. But Annika knew. Riven's instincts had never been wrong. Not in the war zone. Not in crowded terminals like this. To the average ear, the space was noisy, but to Riven, it was the sudden silence in one particular pocket that was alarming. Annika looked down. Riven's stride, normally smooth, had shortened, tense, like a predator in stealth. No one else noticed, but she did, and she knew something was about to happen. Then, Riven barked. The sound sliced through the tension like a blade. Sharp, intentional, focused. Passengers flinched. A few instinctively stepped back. Several phones shot up. Cameras started recording. Annika stopped in her tracks. Riven was locked onto a woman mid-30s, well-dressed, her brown hair neatly curled. She held a tightly swaddled child in her arms and stood by signpost 17, where the waiting area met the international departure corridor. At first, Annika thought Riven had made a mistake, but his eyes, focused, hardened, unwavering, told her otherwise. This wasn't a defensive bark. I didn't panic. It was a warning, the specific alert Riven had been trained to give when detecting a high-risk behavioral anomaly involving a child. The woman took a step back, not out of fear, but calculation. Her eyes didn't blink, but her arms tightened subtly around the infant. Riven barked again, louder now, sharper, a chain of feral sound that didn't let up. A nearby officer stormed over, frowning. "Officer Hale, restrain your dog, there's a child involved." Annika held the leash firmly and issued a command with crisp authority. "Riven, back." But Riven didn't move. He stood his ground, body taut, ears pinned forward, eyes locked onto the woman. And in that suspended moment amid the passengers' stares, the security team's irritation, and the crackling of internal radios, Annika felt her own certainty falter. Could he be wrong this time? "Annika, call Rivenoff immediately." The voice crackled through her earpiece, sharp and cold, Lieutenant Marshall commanding the shift from the operations center. He wasn't on site, but he'd seen the security feed. And from his angle, it looked like a service dog threatening a woman holding a child in a terminal already pushed to its edge by a snowstorm. Annika inhaled. She crouched beside Riven, her voice low. "Easy, boy, what are you seeing?" Riven didn't glance her way. His eyes were pinned on the woman, who had now begun inching toward the emergency exit. "Officer Hale!" The lieutenant's voice rose, impatient. "Either control your dog or remove yourself from active duty. No behavior like this is authorized, especially not with a child present." A chill coursed down Annika's spine. Around her, murmurs began to spread. An older man muttered, "It's just a mother and baby." "What's the dog barking for?" A young woman live-streamed with a smirk. "Guess even K9s get stressed in winter." Annika knew what was happening, and worse, she knew what would happen next. If she gave the stand-down order, Riven would back away. The scene would settle. The woman would vanish into the crowd. And if the child really wasn't hers, if something was truly wrong, the truth would disappear into the snowstorm. Then would come the paperwork, the apology, the disciplinary hearing. But if she chose to trust Riven... Annika closed her eyes, just for a breath. Not to hear her superiors, not the crowd, but to remember. She remembered the rubble, the heat, the pain, and a dog-broken leg, bloodied snout howling, digging with his own body to pull her from the wreckage. If she hadn't trusted that sound back then, she'd be dead. Annika opened her eyes. She stepped forward, placing herself between Riven and the woman. "My name is Officer Annika Hale, Behavioral and Child Protection Unit. I request an immediate check on this passenger. Reason: abnormal response from a specialized service animal." Her voice wasn't loud, but it hit the terminal like a silent detonator. From that moment forward, there would be no turning back. Some memories don't follow the order of time. They return like shrapnel sudden, uninvited, always echoing with something that was never fully spoken. Kandahar, 18 months ago. Night had just fallen when gunfire erupted across the arid outskirts of a military camp. The assault came as Annika's team was conducting a supply drop. No one saw it coming. A rocket slammed straight into the fuel depot behind them. The explosion rippled through the compound, collapsing steel roofing, concrete walls, and tension cables burying 3 soldiers alive. Annika was one of them. She was trapped. She couldn't remember if she screamed or stayed silent. Only the burnt stench of smoke, the sharp clang of metal scraping flesh, and the searing pain like hundreds of blades driving into her chest. She tried to lift her arm, but her shoulder cracked. Her vision dimmed, and then darkness flooded in. Until another sound pierced the silence, scratching claws, and a low, broken whine. Through the dust, a thin shadow emerged, bloodied, soot-covered, weaving through the wreckage. It wasn't human. It was a dog. One ear torn, hind leg limping but eyes burning with the will to live. He dug, without stopping. It was him. Riven, who pulled Annika from that grave, not by strength, but by sheer presence, by life itself. And the eyes he had that night were the same eyes she saw again today in the chaos of Phoenix Skyview. After the blast, Annika was no longer the same. She awoke in a field medical tent, white light beaming down on her eyes, and panicked, convinced she was under interrogation. It took 2 full minutes for the nurse to hold her thrashing arm despite it being pinned in 3 steel rods and wrapped in gauze from shoulder to wrist. 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, mild brain trauma. But what the scans couldn't detect was the tremor that had taken root in her mind. Annika didn't cry, didn't scream, but night after night she jolted awake, sweating, trembling, gasping for breath. In her dreams she was back under the rubble, paralyzed, suffocating, and completely alone. Except once, when the smell of ash gave way to warm fur, and a familiar pair of eyes bent close, whimpering gently, as if to say, "I'm here." The doctors diagnosed PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. No one said it outright, but they all knew. People like Annika rarely returned to the field. She couldn't hold a rifle for more than minutes. Her reflexes lagged. Her short-term memory frayed at the edges. Worse was the dislocation. There were moments she couldn't tell where or when she was. One loud sound, a flash of light, a raised voice in a crowd, and suddenly she was back, beneath the ruins of Kandahar. But there was one constant. No matter where she woke up, no matter what nightmare she stumbled through, there was always something beside her bed, breathing softly, never leaving. Riven. No one talked much about injured war dogs. Even fewer knew that many K9 units, once too slow to respond or too emotionally scarred, were labeled unfit for continued service. A cold phrase, one that meant termination. Riven was sent to a rehabilitation center in Nevada, the same month Annika was transferred to a military physical therapy facility. His medical file was marked in red ink. Deep abdominal lacerations, rear left knee trauma, inability to orient under high-pressure environments. But worse than the physical damage was the behavioral note. Hyperreactive to infant cries, displays extreme response to human blood scent. The training units called it combat reflex disorder, a canine form of PTSD, the same reason most handlers refused to take Riven back after recovery. He was labeled difficult to redeploy, spent his days motionless in a steel kennel silent, wouldn't eat when strangers approached, until Annika arrived. Only then did he let out a low growl and wag his tail. No one believed it, that an officer not yet recovered herself would fight to adopt a dog flagged for decommission. But Annika didn't explain. She just submitted the paperwork by hand every day until it was approved. In the adoption form, she wrote only one line. "We are not unfit to serve. We just need to serve differently." The day Riven left the center, even the most seasoned vet techs admitted, "Never seen a dog stand up from a whisper that soft." Riven didn't bark. He simply rose-walked out of the kennel when Annika reached out her hand and whispered, "This time, I won't let you be the only one doing the saving." The house Annika rented sat on the edge of Tucson, near the Catalina Mountains, where sunsets blazed crimson and the desert wind whispered through the cactus fields like echoes from another world. On his first day home, Riven lay by the door. He didn't eat, didn't play, didn't meet her eyes. As for Annika, though, she tried to arrange everything in the house, from routines to safe distances. She couldn't escape the sudden jolts in her sleep or the tremble in her hands every time a loud explosion crackled on TV. They lived together, but like shadows, passing quietly, not yet ready to touch, until one night. Annika woke from a nightmare drenched in sweat, heart pounding erratically. She didn't scream, but her eyes were wide open, seeing nothing but smoke and collapse. She sat frozen, fists clenched around her pillow, unable to move. And then, something warm brushed against her leg. Soft, wordless, but unmistakably present. It was Riven. He didn't bark, didn't whimper. He simply sat at the edge of her bed, pressing his forehead gently to her shin. As if to say, "I'm here. Still here." From that night on, they began relearning how to live together, one small step at a time. Annika took Riven for morning walks, never far, just around the small pond behind the house. She restrained him, not with sharp commands, but with gentler gestures, deeper cues. Sit if you feel scared. Touch my hand if you're okay. And Riven taught her how to breathe again. When she held her cup of tea, he would sit beneath the table. When a car screeched outside, Riven wouldn't react. He would simply turn and look at her, as if to say, "That was then. This is now." And so they stitched memories back together, not to forget them, but to tell them again, through quiet presence. One afternoon, Annika burst into tears after realizing she had just laughed for the first time in nearly a year because of Riven's awkward attempt to climb onto the couch. And that was the first time her tears fell not from fear, but from the feeling that she was alive again. There was one thing Annika learned quickly after bringing Riven home. What they had shared in Kandahar had forever changed the way they saw each other. They weren't owners and pets. They weren't rescued. They were co-survivors from the same explosion, the same war, the same moment suspended between death and life. And they had chosen each other to keep going. Annika couldn't recall how many nights she sat on the back porch, moonlight fading over the cold concrete, with Riven resting beside her, chin on her knee, eyes half closed, ears alert to every gust of wind that shook the mesquite trees. And no one but Riven had ever stood between her and a drunken man screaming in the parking lot, just one look, and a low growl. No order needed. No commands, no words. Once, while visiting the K9 Evaluation Center for a behavioral check-in, a young trainer asked her, "What command do you use to get him to respond?" Annika smiled softly, not answering right away. She looked at Riven, who was sitting a few paces away, watching her every micro-movement, and said, "None. He just has to see what I need." Their bond had not been forged through discipline or drills. It was tempered by survival, by trust that had once been shattered and then offered again, through a quiet nudge, a well-timed bark, a gaze that never strayed. In the official military record, Riven was still marked unsuitable for active deployment. But to Annika, he was the one thing that gave her the courage to re-enter the world. After 6 months, they were officially designated a behavioral response civilian unit, one of the few teams specialized in emotional monitoring at public transit hubs. No weapons, no criminal chases, no narcotic detection, only one mission: to detect what others couldn't see. And only those who had stood at the edge of life and death could do such work. Annika once said during a special training for new recruits, "Riven doesn't need my commands. We don't need to fully understand each other, just to be there for each other. Sometimes, presence is the only answer." And for anyone who'd ever seen them work, in crowds, in noise, in chaos, in snowstorms, no one called Riven a dog. They called him a partner. Riven's bark tore through the air like a blade slicing taut fabric. For a split second, everything around Gate B12 fell silent, then burst into a frenzy of gasps, whispers, security calls, and a sea of phones raised to record. Passengers backed away instinctively, forming a circular void around Riven like the eye of a storm no one had seen coming. Annika stood frozen. Her hand still gripped the leash, but inside her a different storm had begun to howl. "What if I'm wrong?" Riven, once decorated for his uncanny instinct, was now growling, barking in rapid succession at a young woman cradling a sleeping child. The woman stepped back, her face shifting from confusion to concern. Around them, passengers drew their phones, their eyes sharpening with judgment. A voice crackled through the radio. "Officer Hale, status report. Passengers are panicking. Restrain your K9 immediately." The standard command, but it struck her chest like a blade of hesitation. She looked at Riven. His ears were locked forward, front legs braced, weight leaning ahead. He barked, but his eyes weren't wild. They were pleading, focused, as if trying to say something he couldn't. He didn't pull on the leash. He didn't charge. He just barked in a rhythm that felt intentional, too specific to ignore. Part of Annika wanted to end it, to pull him away, apologize, de-escalate, follow protocol. But another part of her, deeper, older, was remembering a night in Kandahar. That night, if not for a faint whimper beneath the rubble, Riven would never have started digging. And if the rescue team had waited for official orders, she wouldn't have made it out alive. Some things don't come with confirmation. They come with trust. And in that moment, Annika realized this wasn't just a security incident. This was a test of the very vow she had written on the adoption form. "We are not unfit to serve. We just need to serve differently." She inhaled, eyes fixed on her partner who refused to back down. Was she risking everything on a hunch? Maybe. But once, it saved her life. And now she would stand by it. The glow of dozens of phones lit Annika's face like floodlights, as if she were no longer an officer, but the accused in a public trial. "What the hell is she doing? That dog's out of control!" A suited man shouted, still filming. "Oh my God, it's barking at a mother and baby. How is this allowed?" A woman holding 2 boarding passes recoiled in disgust. Annika swallowed hard. No one could see she was shaking. Not from the barking, but from the eyes. All the eyes. Videos were already streaming, every whisper, every sideways glance mounting. She no longer felt like Annika Hale, war veteran, decorated officer, survivor. She was now the woman who couldn't control her dog. Somewhere behind her, someone muttered, "Call her superior. Suspend her immediately." The baby in the woman's arms still hadn't moved. No stirring, no twitch, no startled cry even with Riven's aggressive barking inches away. That one detail, it froze Annika in place. If that was a real infant, why was it so still? But she couldn't say it aloud. She couldn't shout, "Something's not right," because now every move she made risked being dismissed as damage control. The judgment had already begun. A senior security officer, Carter, strode into the circle, his face hard as stone. "Annika, I need you to remove the dog. Now you're escalating chaos." She nodded once, fingers tightening around Riven's leash, as if letting go would shatter every ounce of trust she had earned. But Riven wouldn't turn away. He kept his gaze locked on the woman still barking. It wasn't aggressive, not a command to attack. It was a rhythm, broken, stuttering, off-beat, unlike anything Annika had ever trained him to do. A passenger nearby muttered, "Record everything. This is definitely going viral. Airport cops are threatening a mother with a baby." And in that moment, Annika heard it. Herself. Stepping back. Riven didn't. He stayed rooted, his eyes locked on the same target. That's when Annika realized the crowd might see her as failing. But Riven's eyes were the only judgment that mattered now. No one else noticed. Not the flashing phones, not the whispers, not the rising tension. But Annika saw it. Riven wasn't lunging, wasn't snapping, wasn't clawing or growling. He just stood and barked. Each sound, a solitary note in a disjointed symphony of alarm. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, pause. Then a low whine. She'd recorded this behavior before, in training drills designed to detect anomalies, not in objects or sounds, but in relationships, in the invisible space between a caregiver and a child when something didn't match. "Riven, that's enough," she whispered, but the resolve in her voice had faded. Riven turned his head for a heartbeat, then looked right back. That feeling returned. Kandahar. The scraping of bloodied paws against cement. The low growl when he sensed her fading breath beneath rubble. He hadn't reacted by training then. He'd reacted to the truth. And now Riven's bark wasn't a threat. It was a warning, a rhythm of urgency. He wasn't staring at the woman. He was staring at the baby in her arms. So still it resembled a doll. No flinch, no leg twitch, no startled breath, no reaction to noise. "She's just tired, just asleep," the woman said, voice trembling. But Annika was already connecting the dots. Riven went silent, lowered his head, took a step forward. Not like a predator, but like a medic nearing a fragile patient. A low whine trembled from his chest, as if his heart had sensed what eyes could not. An odd breath pattern, a strange chemical trace sedent, the missing warmth between skin and maternal instinct. And suddenly, amid the noise, the phones, the swarm of assumptions, Annika saw only one thing. The truth, waiting for a name. In the flurry of radio calls demanding her withdrawal, in the tightening circle of cameras and outrage, she didn't look away from Riven. His eyes. Not angry, not afraid. Only full of something urgent, something solemn, something sacred. "She's just tired. That's all," the woman repeated, louder now as if trying to convince herself. But Riven had already sat down, no longer barking, no longer tense, just watching the child. Breathing once. Then again. The entire airport seemed to freeze inside that strange stillness. Annika remembered the first time she touched Riven's head. Right after he was pulled from the war zone, his body bleeding, but his eyes alive. Holding her. "I wasn't saved by strength," she'd once told a therapist. "I was saved by loyalty that asked for no explanation." She lowered herself beside him. The crowd stirred. A uniformed officer kneeling next to her dog, in the middle of being recorded, during an active retreat order. "Annika, respond now. Remove the K9 from the scene immediately." Carter's voice snapped in her earpiece. She took out the earpiece, looked up, straight at the woman. "Ma'am, I need to examine the child, right now." "No, you have no right!" the woman cried, clinging tighter to the baby, taking a step back. And that was all Annika needed to know. A real mother, in panic, protects, pleads. She doesn't hide. "Medical security," she said aloud. "Clear, firm. Prepare for an emergency infant wellness check. Suspected irregularities present." A few airport staff hesitated, then stepped forward. 2 paramedics were dispatched via emergency code. When Annika looked to Riven again, he was still sitting. Calm. Still. But his eyes had softened. As if to say, if you trust me one more time, that life, fragile as it is, might be saved. Annika reached out, touched his head. "Thank you," she whispered. "Once again. It was you who saved me." The woman straightened, clutching the child to her chest. Her breath came fast and shallow, as if the entire world had turned against her. Annika raised both hands, palms open, a calming gesture. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice soft, careful not to let the moment tip further toward chaos. The woman glanced around, her eyes blazing with a fear that had no clear shape. "Lindsay," she said quickly. "Lindsay Carter." Annika gave a slow nod. "I'm Officer Hale. This is my partner Riven." She gestured toward the German shepherd sitting barely 2 steps away, his eyes still fixed on the bundled child. Lindsay's arms tightened around the infant. Her whole body wound taut like a wire, and her voice tried to stay even. "I don't understand. What's happening here? My baby's just sleeping. You're making a scene." "No one wants to escalate anything, Lindsay," Annika replied, keeping her tone closer to a friend's than a cop's. "But Riven is a specialized working dog, and his behavior indicates something might need attention. I just need to make sure the baby is all right." "She's fine," Lindsay snapped, her voice rising. "We've been stuck here for hours. She's exhausted. She's sleeping." She said, "Not my daughter, not sweetheart." Annika registered that without judgment, but with instinct. "Which airline are you flying?" she asked, as if changing the subject casually. Lindsay hesitated for half a second. "American Airlines to Chicago, then connecting to Denver. My husband's waiting." Annika didn't blink. "American canceled all flights to Chicago 2 hours ago. Snowstorm." Silence. 1 heartbeat. 2. "Oh, right. I meant United. Sorry. It's been a mess all day. I'm just flustered." Annika nodded again, but inside, something cracked. Lindsay's voice, once confident, had begun to slip. Beside her, Riven stood, not growling, not pulling, just shifting shoulders tense, neck tilted toward the child. Annika stepped closer, slow and deliberate. "Lindsay, I'm not going to do anything unless absolutely necessary, but I do need your cooperation. If there's any chance the child needs medical attention, I have to call support." The woman didn't answer. Her hands gripped the blanket wrapped around the baby too tightly, like she was afraid someone might snatch it away. And Annika knew something was wrong, not in the shouting, but in the overly measured caution. She crouched down, eyes on the bundle wrapped in a thick cream blanket. Not a single finger was exposed. No motion, not even a shiver. No instinctive clenching, no twitch at the lights. Behind her, the sounds of the airport seemed dull, as if someone had muted the world. Everything narrowed into one question. Is this child still alive? "May I see her for just a moment?" Annika asked, voice gentler than ever. Lindsay clutched tighter. "You think I've done something to her?" Her eyes darted, scanning for an exit. "No," Annika replied. "I'm just concerned. I just want to be sure." In the tense stillness, snow dust drifted through the glass doors. The red letters on the flight board blinked in warning. But the child remained still. No stir, no whimper, no reflexive motion, no curling of toes from pressure. Annika inhaled. Memories flooded back from her field medic rotation in the military. Infants have heightened reflexes. Loud noise startle, tight squeeze squirm, sudden light flinch. If there's no response, check respiration immediately. "What's her name?" Annika asked, keeping the conversation going. "Amelia," Lindsay said, after a beat too long. Just 1 beat, but it was enough. Riven whimpered. Annika gave a discreet hand signal, the one that summoned the med team to her location. Then, the child made her first sound. Not a cry, but a breath. So faint it was barely there, as fragile as a snowflake vanishing in the air. Then a tiny arm shifted, not from instinct, but from the final effort of a body fighting to stay alive. "Did you give her anything?" Annika asked sharply, for the first time letting steel into her voice. Lindsay stepped back. Just cough syrup. It's cold, that's all. Annika tilted her head. It wasn't a cough. It wasn't fatigue. It was something else. Something that had pulled Amelia too deep far beyond safe sleep. As the medical team approached, Riven stood. He walked forward, slow and steady. No barking. No growling. Just positioning himself between Lindsay and the baby, like an invisible gate separating two worlds. The nurse placed her stethoscope against the infant's chest, then turned to Annika and gave a subtle shake of the head. Her lips pressed tight, holding back a full alarm. Breathing weak, pupils slow to react, pulse barely there, a countdown had begun. Silent, but real. Annika pressed lightly on the radio mic at her shoulder. Dispatch, confirm passenger record for Lindsay Carter. Destination airline? The voice from Central Control came back through her earpiece. No listings under that name for any Skyview departures today. Further verification required. Annika turned back. Lindsay, I need to see your e-ticket. Flight details. Lindsay blinked, clearly pushed to the edge. Her hands fumbled through her purse. They were shaking not from the cold. It's American Airlines. To Chicago. My husband's waiting, I told you already. Annika gave a soft nod. You're right. But that airline canceled all flights to Chicago 4 hours ago. Snowstorm. Did you hear the announcement? Silence. Lindsay's expression tightened, just for a split second. Then she gave a soft, forced laugh. Oh, I actually meant United. I keep mixing them up. It's been such a chaotic day. Chaotic, Annika echoed, her voice gentle. Can you open the airline app? Confirm the flight code? Lindsay hesitated. My phone, it's dead. Of course. Annika didn't flinch. She held her gaze on Lindsay, then shifted her eyes to the baby now being assessed by 2 EMTs. A soft beep from the monitor sounded. Not critical. But enough. Enough to know this woman could not be allowed to leave. Lindsay, Annika said, voice firm now, I need to see your ID, and the baby's. That's not necessary. You're blowing this out of proportion. Lindsay's voice pitched higher, her eyes scanning for a way out. In an instant, Riven stepped forward, one large stride. No bark, no growl, just stillness. His back arched, muscles tight, body alert. Ready, but not aggressive. Lindsay flinched, took a step back. Riven doesn't attack the innocent, Annika said quietly. He only stands where someone has to stand. At that moment, something inside her clicked. The puzzle pieces scattered and uncertain were falling into place. Lindsay wasn't a mother defending her child. She was someone shielding a truth that Riven had sensed from the very beginning. In those early minutes, Riven's barking had been relentless, sharp, rhythmic, like a siren pulling every eye toward a threat too subtle to name. But now, with the scene laid bare, and the danger no longer hypothetical, Riven had shifted. He stopped barking, not because anyone told him to, but because what needed to be heard had been. Annika stood beside him, sensing his breath slow deeper, steadier, not a sign of tension releasing, but a shift. From detection to protect. Riven tilted his head slightly, his ears perked, then moved, one at a time, independently catching and sorting each sound from the blurred chaos of the airport. He didn't take his eyes off the child. And in those eyes, there was no longer sharpness or judgment, only stillness. A quiet watching. Not of the woman, not of the medics, but of the infant fragile, fading under layers of blanket and silence. A nurse moved too quickly, reaching toward the baby. Riven tensed, shoulder muscles contracting, body shifting. No growl, just enough movement to make the nurse pause. "Slowly," Annika said gently. "Riven is in protection mode." Her voice was soft, but it shifted the entire energy in the room. Every medic, every bystander adjusted. No one gave Riven commands. He didn't need instructions. He was already where he needed to be. His body remained taut but calm like a gate, unlocked yet vigilant, opening only for what was right. He placed himself between the baby and Lindsay, not with force, but with complete, unwavering presence. That presence alone made Lindsay hesitate. She didn't back away anymore, but she couldn't step forward either. "It's like he understands everything," one of the medics whispered. "He doesn't just understand," Annika replied, eyes fixed on every movement of her partner. "He feels." A minute later, the airport's internal paramedic unit arrived, stretcher wheels humming softly beneath flashing emergency lights. The team prepared to transport the baby for further evaluation. Lindsay moved, attempting to follow. But Riven stepped slightly to the side, blocking her. No bark, no pressure, just a boundary soft, quiet, absolute. A line drawn not in aggression, but in trust. Riven didn't need to speak the human tongue. He didn't need rules to follow. He only needed to feel. This child, this delicate flicker of life, needed to be protected. Not by command, not by training, but because something in his heart had remembered through scars and silence. If you cannot save them all, then hold on to just one. At the right time, in the right place. As the emergency stretcher began to roll away from the waiting area, Annika stepped closer to Lindsay this time, her eyes no longer searching for cooperation, but delivering a deliberate message. "Ms. Lindsay," she said calmly, "before the child is moved to the emergency unit, I need to verify the identities of both of you. Please present your passport or any form of identification, yours and the baby's." Lindsay paused. Not from anger, not from surprise, but like an actress in a script that had just skipped a beat. The baby's documents, they're in checked baggage," she said, eyes darting elsewhere. "I thought you didn't need them on hand for infants." Annika didn't respond right away. She'd heard enough perfectly reasonable excuses used to conceal deeply illegal truths, and it was in those harmless-sounding words that the first crack in a perfect mask often appeared. For infants under 1 year old, especially on international flights, a passport is mandatory, Annika replied gently, even before passing security. Lindsay gave a tight, awkward smile. "I must have been mistaken. My head's all over the place today." "It's all right," Annika said, but her hand was already pressing the call button on her shoulder radio. "Requesting security to assist in locating passengers' checked luggage." The moment she said it, Lindsay's gaze hardened. The mask was still intact, but a hairline fracture had formed. "Lindsay," Annika repeated, her voice now steadier, firmer. "I need the baby's passport or any identifying document." The woman's lips tightened. Her fingers clutched the handle of her designer handbag, a luxury brand, pristine, but oddly untouched by travel. The seams are sharp, leather flawless, paper tags increased. "As I said, the documents are in the checked bag," Lindsay replied faster this time. Too fast. "And you placed all essential documents in cargo?" Annika asked, not breaking eye contact. "Because I didn't think they'd be checked. I'm her mother. I have rights." Lindsay's voice rose, blending confusion with a growing defensiveness. "No one is disputing your rights as a mother," Annika said. "But in an emergency, when an infant is unresponsive, you understand why I need to follow protocol, right?" A heavy silence passed between them. Lindsay nodded. But it wasn't agreement. It was desperation, seeking a temporary escape. "Can you tell me the baby's full name?" Annika asked next, this time without yielding. "Amelia Carter," Lindsay said after a slight pause. A pause too short to catch in casual conversation. But in the language of investigations, it was a signal as loud as a confession. Annika noted the name. "Date of birth?" "November, last year. I don't remember the exact day. I'm exhausted." "You don't remember your own daughter's birthday?" Annika asked softly. Her voice is still kind, but her eyes were not. Lindsay quickly corrected herself, stumbling. 17th. November 17th. I got it mixed up, that's all." "Can you write that down for confirmation?" That question was the final drop. "You think I'm lying?" Lindsay snapped. "You're accusing me because of a dog? You think I'm not her real mother?" Annika didn't answer. She lowered her gaze toward Riven. The dog hadn't moved from his place near the stretcher, where the little girl still lay in a twilight state, her breaths fragile as thread. He hadn't barked, hadn't tensed, but his eyes had never looked away. And in those eyes there was no confusion, only a warning. "Lindsay," Annika finally said, her voice steady after a pause. "We're going to investigate this thoroughly, because this isn't just about you. It's about the safety of a child who cannot speak for herself." As the tension around them tightened like a drawn wire, as Lindsay's voice began to waver between fury and panic. Riven, once again, did the opposite of what anyone expected. Without a word, without a command, the dog moved toward the emergency stretcher where the child still lay unconscious in her fragile sleep. Riven didn't bark, didn't warn. He simply walked softly, slowly, as if he, too, feared disturbing something more delicate than the snowfall outside. Then Riven lay down. Just one motion simple, and enough. He rested his head beside the tiny hand of the baby. There was no gesture of ownership, no demand for recognition, just presence, as if to say, "Just breathe, I'll keep watch over your sleep." No one spoke, the medical staff froze. Even Annika paused her pen. Lindsay started wide-eyed, as if unable to comprehend why a creature would behave in a way that defied every instinct she knew. In that brief moment, the cold, chaotic terminal seemed to hold its breath alongside Riven. A fragment of pure loyalty, an act without motive, a presence enough to remind everyone in that space. This child was no longer alone. No one dared speak. The airport's PA system faded into the background. The blizzard still raged outside. But within this small, fluorescent-lit pocket, where a silent infant lay encircled by suspicion and surveillance, something shifted. Slowly, softly. A tiny finger-pale and paper-thin twitched. Not a reflex, not a seizure, but a movement, with intention. The finger brushed gently against the fur on Riven's neck, as if the baby somehow sensed someone was there, someone was staying. Riven didn't move. He only closed his eyes, lowering his head slightly so that the contact could last just a little longer. A breath lifted from the girl's chest. For the first time since it all began, her ribs visibly rose and fell. "She's responding," one of the nurses whispered, almost afraid to break the moment. Annika stayed silent. She didn't need medicine to explain what had just happened. No psychological theory, no academic citation. She simply knew. A connection had been made deep within the current of life itself. Not by medication, not by language, but by a touch, a warmth, a soul recognizing another soul. As the girl's fingers stirred, the nurses jumped into motion. A small oxygen tube was inserted. The monitor came to life, flickering with signs of returning stability. But what Annika focused on was Lindsay. The woman stood frozen. Her face was unreadable, yet her eyes twitched, as if something in this moment had shattered a calculation too precise to allow for miracles. She muttered something under her breath, barely audible. "That's not possible. She wasn't supposed to wake." Annika heard it clearly. And that sentence was not the reaction of a mother relieved. It was the unease of someone watching a plan come undone. Annika stepped forward. "Ms. Lindsay Carter, under the authority of airport security, I am formally requesting that you leave the emergency area for a separate interview." "Interview?" Lindsay stepped back. "I haven't done anything wrong. You're violating my civil rights." "We suspect falsification of identity," Annika replied, "and this child's safety must be guaranteed." Two medical security officers stepped in beside her. Annika nodded. Riven didn't bark. But when Lindsay turned to walk away, he rose, swiftly stepping between her and the stretcher. His eyes weren't simply watching anymore. They were warned. And this time, Lindsay didn't dare move any closer. The first piece of information arrived at dawn, when the facial recognition system cross-checked the ID photo of Lindsay Carter against the federal database. Only one result came up, but it belonged to someone else. Evelyn Moore. Age 36. Last known residence, Plano, Texas. Medical history. Previously admitted for mandatory psychiatric treatment at Lakewood Center, a facility specializing in trauma-induced disorders. When the full report landed on Annika's desk, she didn't blink as her eyes locked on the first line. Official diagnosis: postpartum delusional disorder. Presents symptoms of derealization and dissociation. Beneath it, a portrait from her intake, disheveled hair, hollow eyes, a blank, faded stare. But unmistakably, it was the woman from the airport. No matter how skillfully her face had been made up, no matter how her designer clothes masked the truth. She wasn't Lindsay Carter. She had no daughter named Amelia. Everything had changed. This was no longer suspected, no longer a gut feeling. This was a fact. The woman who held the infant yesterday had once been a psychiatric patient. And now, she was carrying a child that wasn't hers. The file on Evelyn Moore was thicker than any report Annika had ever written. Psychological notes were only the surface. The page that haunted most was deceptively simple, a one-page death certificate from the Collin County Coroner's Office. Cause of death: sudden infant death syndrome, CDS. Name of deceased: Jackson Moore. Age: 3 months, 12 days. Condition: died in sleep, no signs of suffocation, trauma, or abuse. Conclusion: sudden unexplained death, no criminal factors. Annika laid the page down. But the words seared themselves into her mind like a soundless scream. Sid's the silent killer. No signs, no warnings, and perhaps worst of all, no answers. Attached to the report was Evelyn's initial statement, still lucid at the time. "I fed him at 2 a.m. When I woke up at 5, he wasn't breathing." Then came days of nothing but blank space. Evelyn stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped talking even to her husband, who left not long after. 3 months later, she began insisting that Jackson was still alive. She believed the doctors had mixed up the bodies, that a cover-up had occurred, that her baby had been taken away for protection. Some said it was denial, others called it a defense mechanism. But the moment she attempted to sneak into a hospital maternity ward, cradled the wrong newborn in her arms, and screamed, "Jackson, it's Mommy!" Any defense lost ground. She was admitted to Lakewood. Diagnosis: grief-induced delusional disorder. No violence, no behavioral instability, but a belief so deeply rooted it had taken the place of reality. "I know he's alive," Evelyn once told her therapist. "I can still hear him cry every night. And if he's out there, I will find him." The file is closed. Annika sat in the interview observation room, watching through the one-way mirror. The woman inside wasn't a criminal. She was a mother, dying slowly inside an unspoken loss, but still. The baby lying in the hospital was not Jackson. And when reality collapses, love can become a weapon. Police records from Plano documented an incident 2 springs ago. Location: Greentree Supermarket, suburban Plano time, 3:17 p.m. Witness testimony. "I was picking out formulas. When I turned around, my stroller was gone. I looked up and saw a woman, long hair, cream sweater, pushing my baby out the exit, like he was her own." Surveillance footage confirmed it. The woman was Evelyn Moore. She didn't panic, didn't flee, just pushed the stroller as if she'd finished shopping for her child. Only when security intervened and the real mother arrived, trembling and crying, did Evelyn let go. Not with fear, but with confusion. "I thought it was Jackson," she told police. "He looked just like him, and he was crying." The interrogation didn't last long. A doctor from Lakewood was called in. After overnight monitoring, Evelyn was returned to the facility. No charges were filed. The mother declined to press them. Mental health professionals concluded that Evelyn had no intent to harm, only acted under trauma-linked delusion. But Annika couldn't shake the look in that intake photo. Not the look of a threat, but the look of someone who had misidentified hope. The true danger didn't lie in her actions, but in the sincerity of her misguided belief. The first time it was a supermarket. This time it was an airport. And the baby lying unconscious in the pediatric ICU right now wasn't Jackson, but a living soul, unknowingly pulled into the past pain of someone else. The lights in the interview room remained on, but the woman inside had no light left in her eyes. Evelyn Moore sat upright, her hands clasped tightly as if in prayer. She didn't look at the one-way mirror. She didn't react to the camera silently recording her every move. Her gaze was fixed on the empty space in front of her. As if in that void, she saw a child only she could see. Annika sat outside, listening to the playback of the earlier evaluation with the forensic psychiatrist. Her mind restructured itself to survive, he had said. The loss of her child was too sudden, too unresolved. Evelyn entered a state where she rebuilt her reality. To her, Jackson being alive isn't a belief. It's the only truth that allows her to breathe. Annika remembered Evelyn's voice at the airport. That trembling whisper when she was being separated from the child. "If I don't take him now, they'll steal him again." Not the baby. Not the girl. She called the child him, as if it truly was Jackson. During a brief psychological interview, Evelyn had explained further. "I have proof. I've spoken with someone who understands how the system really works. Children like Jackson don't die. They're taken. Given to families more suitable." Annika's brow furrowed. Someone who understands? Who? A broader investigation revealed a name. Dr. Nathan Heller, the psychiatrist once assigned to monitor Evelyn's mental health at Lakewood. A short note buried in Evelyn's final treatment file revealed more than any confession. Patients show elevated responsiveness to reality-anchoring therapy when administered by Dr. Heller. Psychological stability increases significantly following extended private sessions. No treatment plan attached, no full transcript of what those sessions included. And now, a child had been mildly sedated to sleep through an entire journey. It all formed a distorted equation born from grief that had never been properly addressed. No one could say for sure whether Dr. Heller had deliberately nurtured Evelyn's delusion, or had simply been the first not to dismiss it. But one thing was clear. That validation had allowed Evelyn to shift from yearning to resurrect the past to attempt to recreate it. "I didn't steal someone else's baby," Evelyn said in custody. "I just brought Jackson home." Annika stood at the mirror, her eyes never leaving the woman on the other side. She didn't see a criminal. She saw a mother trapped in the darkest moment of her life, a moment she had never escaped. He stepped into the emergency ward with footsteps light as wind skimmed across polished white tile. Dr. Marcus Langford, immaculate white coat, gleaming nameplate, a gray tie knotted with surgical precision. Annika recognized him the moment she saw him, not because they had met, but because she had seen dozens of photos in the Lakewood Psychiatric Hospital surveillance files. A therapist described as steady, empathetic, capable of calming severely distressed patients through direct verbal engagement. One line in his evaluation stood out. "Dr. Langford is the only individual who kept Evelyn Moore from spiraling for 3 consecutive months." When summoned after the airport incident, he hadn't refused. Quite the opposite. He had personally contacted authorities and offered to be present, claiming he might help stabilize the patient. Annika observed from a distance, watching the tall, slender man move through the hallway as if he'd walked it 1,000 times. He nodded politely to the nurses, offered a faint smile to the attending physician, then drew from his coat pocket a black leather folder clearly labeled, "Patient Evelyn M. Moore." Everything about him was in order, his voice, his posture, his words. But that very perfection made Annika shiver. Something didn't fit. The door to the special care unit creaked open. Soft white light reflected off the spotless floor as Dr. Langford approached, his leather shoes silent. But even in that absolute quiet, one creature sensed what humans couldn't hear, couldn't see. Riven, stationed at the far end of the hall outside the pediatric room, shifted his weight. His ears perked up, eyes wide. He didn't bark, didn't growl, but a visible tension rippled through his body like a current. Annika noticed it before anyone else. She laid a hand gently on Riven's lead. Not to restrain him, but to feel it again, that quiet, electric hum of readiness pulsing through every muscle in his frame. Langford didn't glance at the dog as he passed, but Riven never looked away. He rose to his feet, not in threat, but as a soldier rising to post. Riven's breath slowed, his chest lifted in soft, precise rhythm, his nose pointed directly at the doctor, and in the hall's sterile lighting, a soft amber gleam surfaced in his gaze, the kind seen only in beings who have smelled both life and death on the battlefield, and now detected something they should not be smelling here. Annika frowned, crouching beside him. "What is it, Riven?" He gave no signal, no tail movement, no sound, just a subtle repositioning of his front paw, a discreet defensive stance. Langford paused as he neared Sophia's room. The baby girl is still hooked to IV lines and biometric monitors. He peered through the observation glass, then, as if recalling something, turned to Annika. "I'm Dr. Marcus Langford, currently overseeing Evelyn Moore's psychiatric treatment. I'd like to discuss her current mental state, and if possible, a brief interaction with the child would greatly aid my assessment." Annika glanced at Riven, who had now stepped forward to block the entrance, standing like a living gate. He didn't bark, he wasn't hostile, but he was unmoving. A barrier forged not of muscle, but of intuition. No one had trained him to react to doctors. No one had instructed him to be wary of those with badges and credentials. But Riven knew. He sensed something in the scent, the movement, maybe even the fractional skip in Langford's heartbeat when he looked into the baby's room. There was no need for language, only silence and instinct. Langford adjusted his collar and took a step closer to Sophia's door. Inside, the child once mistaken for Jackson lay unconscious, her fragile body enveloped in medical lines and gentle beeps. Riven stood his ground. Annika said nothing. She didn't need to. Riven's presence, poised, alert, and resolute, spoke volumes. Langford smiled, but it was the kind of smile worn by men who are used to being obeyed. "I understand," he said, voice even and firm. "The dog is doing his job. But as I've explained, I am the attending physician for Evelyn Moore, and to properly assess her mental condition, I need access to all relevant factors, including the child she believes to be her deceased son." Annika didn't answer right away. She was watching Langford's eyes, not the gaze of someone compassionate toward a delusional patient, but one sharp, controlling, almost possessive. Langford took a step closer, almost forcing Riven to back off. "Under federal law," he continued, "I'm authorized to request access to any subject relevant to a psychological evaluation. If you obstruct that, I'll be forced to escalate the matter to the hospital's legal counsel and the state supervisory board." The voice no longer offered. It warned. Riven responded. Not with a growl, not with teeth, but by lowering his stance, crossing his front paws, and bowing his head slightly. Eyes locked on the man. To Annika, the posture meant one thing: tactical warning. She raised her federal badge to chest level and replied calmly, "As a federal security officer overseeing this case, I'm authorized to deny access if there's any risk of psychological harm or compromise to the safety of the minor in protective care. If you have concerns, I recommend filing a formal request through the Office of the Assistant Attorney General." Langford narrowed his eyes. His lips pressed into a tight line. The polite demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, calculated silence. He said nothing more, but the glance he cast before turning away spoke louder than words. This isn't over. Riven didn't flinch, didn't relax, didn't look away. Annika whispered, "Good boy, Riven." We just saw the shadow behind the white coat. Even as Dr. Langford turned, pretending to leave with composed dignity, Riven didn't budge. He didn't follow the doctor, didn't return to his previous post like a perfectly trained canine would. Instead, he stepped back once, then moved deliberately in the opposite direction, planting himself squarely across the hallway that led to the pediatric storage and inpatient wing. His movement wasn't urgent, but it was deliberate, and that made people stop and look. Every motion was measured, his front paws crossed with purpose, his head lowered not in threat, but in unmistakable warning. But now his gaze was no longer on Langford. It had shifted, behind the doctor, toward a place no one else thought danger could come from. Annika straightened. "Riven," but he didn't respond, just a soft snort through the nose. Precise, intentional. Langford stopped mid-stride. "Is there a problem, Officer Hale?" he asked, voice steady, though his shoulders had tensed. Annika didn't reply at first. She stepped toward Riven, crouched slightly, and laid a hand on the back of his neck. He didn't react, but under her fingers she felt it. Tension, not aggression, not fear, but a boundary is drawn tight. This wasn't training. It was instinct, the same instinct that had once saved her beneath the collapse of a crumbling building, that had once sniffed blood beneath smoke and debris on the battlefield. The instinct of a being who couldn't speak, but understood danger more clearly than any words could define. Riven's eyes stayed fixed on the end of the inpatient corridor, where a side exit rarely used, unmonitored by camera led out to the staff parking lot. Annika followed his gaze, and just at that moment a nurse passed by and accidentally dropped a folder of patient records. Riven twitched not from the sound, but from something else. He moved forward, slow, purposeful, and positioned himself directly in front of the exit. Annika rose slowly. She didn't speak. She only reached for her radio. Requesting temporary lockdown of East Inpatient Wing exit. Suspicious activity. Urgent. Riven didn't bark. He didn't growl. He didn't move again. He didn't have to. He had already spoken. With nothing but his presence. When the lights in the Federal Investigation Unit's special briefing room shifted into analytical mode, a cascade of files flickered across the large screen. Lieutenant Cassandra Morrow, civilian records analyst, stood at the front with a composed voice. His real name is Marcus Evan Langford. Before becoming a clinical psychologist at Lakewood, he worked at 2 community hospitals and has a personal history of legal disputes. The most notable case was in 2018, a custody battle. Annika sat in the back, one hand resting lightly on Riven's back. He lay still, but his ears were upright, listening to every breath in the room. On the screen appeared the image of a woman with sunken eyes and disheveled hair. Her name, Amelia Rhodes, Marcus's ex-wife. Cassandra continued. The court awarded custody to the mother based on evidence of psychological manipulation and behavioral control by Marcus during their marriage. A forensic psychologist noted, though there were no signs of physical abuse, the husband displayed clear patterns of emotional isolation and control. The verdict included a restrictive contact clause. Marcus was not allowed near his son without a court-appointed monitor. But what stood out even more was what happened after the verdict. Something strange, Cassandra said, eyes locked on the expanded digital file. During the custody hearings, the evidence submitted by Marcus was vague, yet the court accepted it, as if it were a professional evaluation. Annika frowned. I mean, Cassandra said grimly. Marcus used his title psychologist to shape the mental health narrative of his own wife. Even though he wasn't her treating doctor, he submitted a 7-page analysis describing her as suffering from anxiety disorder with erratic maternal behavior, and it was presented as an objective clinical report. The screen displayed an excerpt of the so-called evaluation. Phrases like emotional dysregulation, obsessive maternal ideation, and unstable temperament repeated over and over, with no medical conclusions to support them. Amelia's actual doctor refuted those claims completely, Cassandra added, but her testimony was dismissed due to therapeutic conflict of interest. Meanwhile, Marcus's document was accepted as an independent expert opinion. Annika's hand tightened. The image of a woman was reshaped, distorted, by the words of the man who once vowed to love her. "What about the judge?" a fellow investigator asked. "Didn't they question the conflict?" "The case was heard in a small district in Denton County," Cassandra replied. "The judge was a former colleague of Marcus's father. Both had worked in the same school health network. The trial was rushed. No one pushed deeper. That doctor title was a shield no one dared to pierce." A courtroom video played on screen-grainy footage, but the audio was sharp. Given the records submitted by the father and the emotional instability evident in the recordings, also provided by the father, the court awards custodial rights to Mr. Marcus Langford, with mandatory psychological evaluations. Mrs. Amelia Rhodes shall have supervised visits in a neutral setting, pending improvement in mental health assessments. "Those recordings?" Annika asked. "Never authenticated," Cassandra shook her head. "No forensic analysis, just sobbing, yelling, and a few clipped sentences." In the shadow of truth, the portrait of a mother had been painted into madness, stitched together from incomplete fragments and sealed by the white coat authority of a man who wore manipulation like a second skin. "He didn't just lose custody," Cassandra said hoarsely. "He made it a mission. For the next 3 years, Marcus never appealed. But he did write." The screen filled with dozens of anonymous forum posts, each under the handle MH Reclaimer, an abbreviation for Matriarchal Healing. Annika skimmed through a few highlighted excerpts. Some mothers are called insane only because they grieve deeper than society is willing to accept. There is no justice in the courtroom for emotions, only for those who can package them as tools of persuasion. I didn't lose custody of my child. I lost the right to prove the truth. So now I help other women do that, by any means necessary. Cassandra explained in a low voice. These posts appeared on a closed forum, mostly for women who lost custody during legal disputes. At first it seemed like a support group, a place for grief and healing. But over time, Marcus's tone shifted. He began guiding, then recruiting. Annika tapped the table slowly with her fingers. He created victims just to cast himself as the rescuer. Exactly, Cassandra nodded. In criminal psychology, we call this the disordered savior complex. They don't rescue out of compassion. They do it to feed a psychological hunger for control. Marcus convinced these women that the system had stolen their motherhood, and only he could return it. A new slide appeared. A matrix of names. Female patients treated at facilities where Marcus had worked. Beside each, file numbers, notes like child deceased, and current conditions, delusional relapse, under residential psychiatric care, classified behavioral risk. Annika's eyes locked on Evelyn Moore, the woman who had clutched a motionless child at the airport. Now just another soul among many, fractured by grief and remolded by manipulation. He didn't just manipulate individuals, Annika murmured. He built an entire structure, a system disguised as healing, crafted to reshape what he believes justice looks like. A fleeting image flashed through her mind, Riven standing in silence outside the hospital room door, as if he had sensed all of this long ago. Cassandra swiped across the touchscreen, pulling up a new map. It wasn't a family tree. It was a network, a lattice of names and psychological histories. At the center, Marcus Langford. Branching out like veins, Evelyn Moore, Elise Warner, Miriam Todd, Claire Kensington, all women who had lost their children mostly due to SIDS, accidents, or custody rulings. He called it the Matriarchal Reclamation Project, Cassandra said, voice now edged with steel. In encrypted files, this was how he framed it, rescuing mothers discarded by the system. Annika leaned closer, eyes tracing the web. And every single one of them attempted to approach a child who wasn't theirs. Yes, Cassandra confirmed. Some were detained. Others were readmitted for psychiatric care. But no one ever traced it back because each case looked like an isolated delusion. But together, it's behavioral conditioning, a coordinated experiment. A new file opened Elise Warner. In Marcus's handwritten notes, a line read, High sensitivity. Phase 3, seed false memory of child abduction. He didn't just plant doubt, Cassandra continued. He staged it. Images, edited videos, fake hospital records. He made them believe their child was still alive and that someone had taken them away. Annika's voice dropped. A parallel world. A staged play, where the central role is always the wronged mother. Cassandra opened a video folder surveillance footage from a therapy room at Lakewood Psychiatric Facility. Marcus sat by Evelyn's bedside. His voice, calm, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Evelyn, they say your child is gone. But do you remember the crying? That night when you passed out? Are you sure he wasn't taken? Sometimes the truth isn't in a death certificate. It's a mother's instinct. Annika clenched her fists. A chill ran down her spine. He didn't heal her, she whispered. He rewired her. And each success was catalogued, Cassandra added. Filed, studied, encrypted, stored in a private off-site unit outside Dallas. He called it the Matriarchal Memory Lab. Riven, resting at Annika's feet, suddenly lifted his head. Ears perked, eyes focused down the hallway, as if something had just crossed a line. Night had long fallen when Annika and the federal task force silently approached Marcus Langford's estate nestled behind a narrow street in the outskirts of Dallas. The amber glow of the street lamps illuminated the elegant facade, but the aged wooden doors and towering wrought iron fences gave off a different energy: seclusion, secrecy, control. Tension rippled through the formation. Like static, everyone understood. This wasn't a typical arrest. This was a threshold, one that might unlock a web of carefully veiled crimes where personal grief had been harvested and weaponized into psychological leverage. The team moved in under orders of extreme caution. Surveillance devices and security traps were expected throughout the house. Through the rear entrance, the lockpicking unit breached with surgical quiet. Inside, the house resembled a private archive shelves filled with medical texts, legal journals, and an array of recording devices positioned with near-clinical precision. It was less a home, more a compact research lab. But Annika knew what they needed wouldn't be found in the parlor or the home office. Each floor was searched, room by room, under the cold sweep of LED flashlights. Then they reached the basement accessed through a narrow wooden staircase worn down by years of use. There, in the subterranean dim, they found Marcus's true study. The walls were plastered with documents, photographs, and densely annotated notes. It reeked not only of obsessive detail, but of obsession itself. What made the entire team freeze, however, was a crack barely visible in the far corner of the room. A subtle sign of something not meant to be seen. Annika pulled out an electromagnetic scanner, waving it slowly across the wall. A soft beep. The kind of sound that said, this wall wasn't solid. With practiced hands, the team uncovered the false panel, methodically peeling away the surface layer. Behind it was a sealed chamber pitch black, completely insulated. A space so quiet it might never have existed. Annika stepped inside first, a flashlight beam slicing through the dark. Metal shelves lined the narrow walls. Storage crates, labeled boxes, hard drives, tapes. This wasn't a workspace. It was a vault of secrets, a morgue for buried stories. Riven moved with her, silent as a shadow. He didn't need commands. He didn't need to be told what to look for. Each step he took was purposeful, every breath deliberate. The air was thick with mildew, bleach, and old sterilization fluid. He circled slowly. Then, a subtle whine escaped his throat. Annika paused. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was a signal. Riven had sensed something. He placed a paw against the concrete wall just below a seam between two cinder blocks and began to scratch lightly. A quiet, rhythmic scrape. Everyone turned. Annika crouched next to him, watching as Riven's nose hovered above the cracks, sniffing. His ears twitched. Then he turned back to her, eyes alert, gaze fixed. Something's here. The flashlight caught a faint curve in the bricks, slightly off alignment. Annika gestured to the tech team. They swept the wall with both a metal detector and an EM pulse scanner. Beep, beep, beep. The signal grew louder, persistent. There was something embedded, hidden. With controlled urgency, the breach team began removing the faux layers. Soon, a narrow metal door emerged, unlocked electronically, barely 3 feet wide. Annika stepped forward. Inside was a cold, compact space, no more than 10 square feet. Metal shelving lined the interior, archival boxes, documents, coded binders. But that wasn't what drew her in. On the far wall, half recessed, was a steel safe. Digital. Reinforced. A keypad glowed faintly, its numbers blinking under the narrow beam of her flashlight. And just like that, the chill she'd carried for weeks turned to something sharper, more precise. This was it, Not the books, not the paper trails. This was where the darkness had roots, and it was locked. Riven stepped in first. He stood still beside the locked cabinet, eyes locked on the safe as if he could see beyond the steel. No barking, no scratching, just complete, silent focus. Annika knew then, whatever horrors had never been spoken aloud, whatever stories had never been told, were waiting on the other side of that wall. She gently opened the cabinet door. Her flashlight swept across carefully bound folders, sealed files, and rows of old VHS tapes, a chilling signal that these memories had been stored, not for weeks or months, but for years. She pulled one file after another, her gaze sharpening with every page turned. Each folder was a tragic chronicle. Case after case of female patients Marcus Langford had personally overseen. All shared a common thread: the loss of a child. Most to sudden infant death syndrome, others to inexplicable, abrupt causes. But it wasn't just medical charts. Each dossier included detailed psychological breakdowns, behavioral shifts, emotional patterns, and chilling annotations in Marcus's own handwriting. Reinforce belief in the child's continued existence use. Direct alternative reality therapy. Patients may be guided to believe the child is alive, hidden with relatives, or taken for protection. Progression favorable in the belief stage. Emotional stability improves under environmental control. Annika picked up one of the VHS tapes and slid it into the old player nearby. The screen flickered, the footage grainy, shadowed. A treatment room appeared. Marcus sat beside a sobbing woman, his voice soft, hypnotic. He pointed to a framed picture of a child playing in a park. "You know they told you your baby is gone. But is that really the only truth? Sometimes healing begins with accepting a different story." The tape continued clips of Marcus guiding multiple women through the same narrative: gentle manipulation, emotional rerouting, crafting fragmented memories of children who had never been taken, just lost. In the next sequences, photos of unrelated children were labeled, assigned, and connected to patients. Fake documents, edited videos, all designed to cement illusions that their child was still out there, stolen, hidden, waiting. It wasn't therapy. It was a program. A system built by Marcus, seen by his patients as a savior, but in truth, a master manipulator wielding grief like a scalpel. Then came the last wall. A narrow door creaked open, revealing a room so absurdly out of place it made Annika stop breathing for a moment. A nursery. Meticulously constructed, artificial, heartbreaking. A white-painted wooden crib sat against the wall. A worn rocking chair rested nearby, its wood grain polished smooth, as if caressed every day. Tiny hand-knit sweaters hung neatly on small pegs. A star-shaped lamp glowed faintly, casting a soft golden light. A velvet rug stretched across the floor. Near the edge, small footprints, faint but deliberate, were pressed into the fabric. Ghosts of dreams that had never lived. Annika entered slowly. Her eyes fell on a shelf stacked with journals. Each was labeled in Marcus's script, tracking the psychological descent of each patient mapped in clinical coldness. Not a workspace, a shrine, built in worship of his own illusion. Then her breath caught. On a small table lay a black and white photograph of an infant swaddled in pristine white, eyes closed, perfectly still. It might have been a portrait of innocence. But here, in this room, it became something else, a symbol of what was lost and forcibly recreated. The warm glow from a vintage desk lamp bathed the picture in soft light, casting shadows that made it feel like Marcus was still there, watching, curating, remembering. Annika scanned the room. Every corner, every detail, was too exact to be real. A curated fantasy, a physical manifestation of denial and guilt made into a world where the dead never stayed dead, and grief was never allowed to rest. Old toys sat untouched, a dried milk bottle, notes scribbled with the title Matriarchal Reclamation Project, expanding on protocols, phases, desired responses. Annika turned to Riven. He stood still beside her, silent as ever, his eyes deep, ancient, as if reading secrets off the walls. This bunker wasn't an archive, it was a manifesto. Marcus hadn't just built files, he built a world where grief was repurposed, where trauma became doctrine, and where healing was replaced by programming. Annika realized in that moment her mission wasn't just to tear open a vault. It was to shatter a psychological fortress, one forged not of steel, but of pain repackaged as hope. She clenched her fists. No more shadows, no more illusions. She would not allow another woman to be rewritten into a character in Marcus's delusion. Not now. Not ever again. After the warrant was approved, Annika and the federal task force moved quietly through a dense pine forest just outside Dallas. It was an isolated area, rarely visited, cloaked in tall trees and early morning mist. They had received an anonymous tip that Marcus Langford had rented a secluded cabin deep within the woods, possibly to hide a child he claimed as his son. The old wooden cabin stood modestly between the trees, surrounded by ivy and wild brush. There were no sounds except for the wind whispering through the branches. Annika led the team, gently pushing open the front door. A sharp, musty scent of mold and decaying wood filled her nose, making her grimace. Inside, dim light slipped through the narrow window slats, illuminating a space both cluttered and oddly intentional. Children's toys, picture books, and a few tiny outfits neatly folded. Before them lay a single bed on it, a pale-skinned boy, eyes closed, small fingers curling faintly in his sleep. "That's Oliver," whispered one team member, pointing to the name tag fastened beside the bed. Annika stepped closer, taking in the fragile features of the child. He was so small, too young to have endured what he had. According to the file, Oliver was Marcus's biological son, kept hidden, completely off any civil or medical record. He had been isolated from society, from family, raised in total seclusion, for one purpose only, to be the centerpiece of Marcus's project. The leftover medical equipment revealed he had been cared for in a makeshift yet systematic way, hooked to health monitors and rudimentary machines. Annika felt the heaviness in the room, the unspeakable weight of a childhood robbed before it began. A child who had never known the outside world, who knew no one but the man he called Doctor, while everything else had been kept from him. She knelt, softly placing her hand on Oliver's, trying to pass a thread of warmth from the world outside. Riven stood beside her, eyes fixed on the boy, as if he too understood his role now, not to guard, but to gently guide this child back into life. In the muted light of the small cabin, Oliver's eyes fluttered open. His gaze was vague, not yet fully present. He had never seen sunlight through leaves, never heard bird song through open windows. His entire world had been this room 4 walls, and the echo of footsteps belonging to a man he only knew as Dr. Mitchell. Not dad, not father, just doctor. That was what Marcus had taught him from the start. The room had few distractions. A handful of toys, simple picture books, all hand-picked to avoid diverting the boy's focus from the man always seated in the corner, in the same worn armchair. Marcus hadn't just raised him. He was the sole figure the boy was ever allowed to trust, the only name Oliver had learned to call. "Dr. Mitchell?" the boy murmured, his voice soft, trembling like a bird's first breath. "Yes, Oliver," Marcus would say, nodding with a strange flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Oliver had grown up inside a reality built entirely by someone else. No real name, no memory beyond what Marcus implanted. Every day, Marcus repeated the same line. I'm your doctor. I saved you. I'm the only one who can protect you from those who want to take you away. The boy was taught to obey without panic, never to question. Every action, when to eat, when to sleep, what to think, was tightly controlled. He was fed on schedule, dressed neatly, and assigned gentle exercises by Marcus. But there was no laughter, no freedom, only surveillance. Day after day, Oliver accepted Dr. Mitchell as gospel because that title, imposed with clinical reverence, reinforced the quiet reign of power inside this manufactured world. Annika glanced over her shoulder. There was Riven calmly seated beside the bed, his gaze steady and kind, as though comforting a soul still shackled by illusion. She knew then. This wasn't just about rescuing a boy from a locked room. It was about pulling him out of a world built entirely on manufactured words and artificial power. The pale cabin light could not dull the resolve on Annika's face as she gently opened the small door to Oliver's room. Beside her, Riven followed each step with careful grace. His silence softened even the surrounding noise. Oliver remained still, eyes barely open, not yet understanding who or what these new presences meant. Especially the large dog unfamiliar, yet strangely calming. Then, something remarkable happened. Riven approached the bedside, breathing slow and quiet. He lowered his head and gently touched his nose to the tiny hand peeking out from beneath the blanket. There was no fear, no tension, only the most tender presence he could offer. His eyes held no command, no demand, just a quiet promise. You are no longer alone. Annika crouched beside the hospital bed, watching how Riven seemed to merge seamlessly into the atmosphere of the small room. She could feel it. Something had shifted. A connection had just been made. Not through words, but through presence, through instinct, through the raw, unspoken language of life itself. Oliver stirred slightly. His tiny fingers reached out, hesitantly at first, then brushed gently against the soft fur of the German shepherd beside him. It was the first true sign of trust the boy had shown, so small in action, yet carrying the weight of every unspoken word in the world. Riven didn't flinch or pull away. On the contrary, he tilted his head gently, offering himself for the child to feel more fully. He let out a quiet whimper, low and soft, as if to say, I'm here. You're safe. Tears welled in Annika's eyes, but she held them back. This moment wasn't meant to be, disturbed by noise only felt. She whispered gently, You're safe now, little one. From now on, you'll be safe. Riven lay down beside the bed, his warm body radiating a quiet calm that filled the cold edges of the room. He was no longer just a working dog. He had become something else entirely. A symbol of trust, of protection, of healing. And at that moment, Annika understood. This wasn't just a physical rescue. It was a spiritual one. Riven and Oliver, two wounded souls, had just begun a shared journey of rebirth. The ventilator continued its steady rhythm in the background, like a soft lullaby carrying the weight of that sacred moment. Oliver's eyes opened slowly, not with fear, but with a fragile clarity, a child's gaze, seeing love for the first time. His eyes wandered, scanning the room, resting on Annika, and then on Riven, as if searching for something real, something to hold on to. Annika reached for his hand, her voice no louder than a breath. Oliver, can you hear me? Do you know your name? He didn't answer at once. A long pause stretched before a faint whisper slipped from his lips. Dad, he told me my name was Andrew. His eyes flickered with uncertainty, like the echo of a name still ringing in his mind, one he had never chosen. Annika frowned slightly, her gaze fixed on the small face in front of her. I think I'm Oliver, he continued, his voice weak but determined. The words cut through the fog like a ray of light piercing the confusion, the layers of conditioning, and the lies he'd been fed for so long. Annika felt a jolt run through her. This child, this boy was not just a secret kept in the dark. He was reclaiming himself, reaching for the truth, his real name, his stolen life. Riven slowly laid his head on Annika's arm, as if to share in the moment-silent solidarity offered in the gentlest way. Annika whispered, her voice trembling with promise, "We'll find the truth, Oliver, and you'll never have to live in the shadows again." The boy turned toward Riven. His eyes, still fragile, now brimmed with something new. Trust. As if in that moment, he had recognized the guardian beside him. Not just a dog, but a friend. And perhaps, for the first time, someone who would never lie. The red and blue lights from the police cars flashed through the early morning fog surrounding Marcus Langford's secluded villa. Footsteps echoed heavily across the wooden floors as the Federal Tactical Unit stormed in, sealing off every hallway, every door, every possible exit. Marcus did not resist. He stood upright, hands calmly folded behind his back, with an expression so composed it unsettled even the most seasoned officers in the room. "Dr. Langford," Annika said, her voice firm and steady, "you are under arrest on federal charges of psychological manipulation, identity falsification, and systemic abuse of mentally vulnerable individuals." Marcus shrugged, a faint smirk curling at the corner of his lips. "You make it sound like I'm being harassed," he replied, his tone disturbingly calm. "I was simply writing a book, a study on matriarchal psychology, on pain, on how mothers are failed by society. I was helping them reclaim themselves." He turned to Annika, his gaze detached, clinical. "You ought to learn how to listen. Not everything is as black and white as your legal reports." Annika didn't respond. She didn't need to. Behind that mask of serenity stood a man who calculated every move. One misstep, and the evidence could vanish. As Marcus was escorted out, Riven stood by Annika's side, unmoving, eyes locked on the man. He didn't bark, but his body was taut with tension. Marcus could speak of research and healing in flowery language. But behind those rehearsed gestures and carefully chosen words, Annika felt it. The facade. The layers of rationalization cloaking a mind that had built prisons disguised as sanctuaries. In the interrogation room, Marcus maintained that same eerie composure. His eyes stayed flat and unreadable, as though he were performing in a one-man show only he could direct. He took his seat slowly, adjusted his collar, and spoke as if giving a TED talk. "My project," he began, "is a revolutionary exploration into matriarchal psychology. I help mothers reconnect with their children, even if it means disrupting the flawed systems that tried to erase them." At that moment, Riven shifted. His ears lifted sharply. He sat up straighter, body bracing not with aggression, but with the poised alertness of a soldier sensing danger in silence. The German shepherd didn't growl, didn't move. But his stare unblinking drilled into Marcus like a warning siren made of eyes. Annika's pulse quickened. Riven's reactions were never arbitrary. He didn't react to anger or lies. He reacted to truth wrapped in malice, to danger behind smooth words. Marcus noticed. "Oh?" he smirked. "Your dog doesn't seem to appreciate the word project." He chuckled, mockery dripping from his voice. "I suppose I shouldn't expect a dog to grasp the complexity of my work." But Riven didn't flinch. He stood slowly, stepped forward, placing himself between Marcus and the room's only exit. His posture was deliberate, silent, but commanding. A stillness settled over the room. Not fear, not tension, but recognition. Everyone's eyes turned to Riven, a living, breathing embodiment of loyalty, intuition, and now Wordless defiance. Annika rose, walked to stand beside Riven, her voice steel-edged. "That wasn't a research project," she said coldly. "It was a system of control, a fantasy prison built to trap grieving women inside a false reality you created." Riven turned his head slightly. One more look at Marcus. No sound, no snarl, just a message. "We see you now. We know who you are." Annika fixed her eyes on Marcus. Her gaze didn't waver. "You speak of salvation like a prophet," she said. "Then tell me this, your son. What's his name? Where did you hide him?" For the first time, the air shifted. Marcus's pupils narrowed. His polished mask cracked just slightly, revealing a sliver of calculation behind the calm. He straightened, pressed his lips together, weighed his words carefully. "My son," he finally said, his voice lower now, "has been known as Andrew, or Oliver. Depends on who's asking." Annika tilted her head slightly. She didn't blink. She didn't smile. She was waiting, not for his words, but for the truth behind them. "Why two names?" Annika asked quietly. Marcus gave a dry, almost theatrical laugh, like a man too familiar with suspicion and accusation to flinch anymore. "Andrew is the name the outside world recognizes. Oliver is the name I gave him, a name that means restoration, a symbol of new life." Annika narrowed her eyes. Something in the way he spoke felt rehearsed, but also deeply personal. "You kept that boy in isolation. You taught him to call you Doctor Mitchell. You erased his identity. For what? A personal experiment?" Marcus's gaze darkened. A flicker of something more volatile passed behind his eyes. "I did nothing wrong," he said, voice low but firm. "I was restoring justice. The system stole my child. I couldn't just stand by." Annika heard it then, not just defiance, but obsession, a conviction so warped it had become a mission. "But you turned other grieving women into pieces on your chessboard," she replied coldly. "You manipulated them, planted illusions in their minds, fed them false hope, so you could justify your own fantasy. You weren't helping anyone." Marcus smiled, a triumphant, unrepentant smile. His eyes held no remorse. "You don't understand. Sometimes to reconstruct truth you have to destroy the rules. That was the only path I had left." Riven remained still beside Annika, eyes locked on Marcus. He didn't bark, didn't growl, but the way he watched, silent, unmoving, felt like an interrogation in itself. Annika glanced at the dog, recognizing the unspoken judgment in his stare. Riven didn't just see Marcus, he saw through him. The interrogation room fell into an eerie stillness. Marcus still sat upright, confident, but every so often his eyes flicked calculating, unsettled. And across from him sat a dog who had once survived war, who had learned to read danger not through sound, but through breath, body, and silence. Riven sat tall, forelegs perfectly aligned, neck tilted slightly forward. No barking, no snarling, just his eyes piercing, steady, unblinking. They stripped Marcus of the last vestiges of control. Annika saw it clearly. The stillness wasn't passive, it was powerful. It was judgment, without the need for words. And it was coming from a soul that had once been broken, now reborn as protector. Marcus turned toward the dog, and for the briefest moment his facade cracked. Not from fear, but from the realization that what sat before him was not just a dog. It was a comrade, a guardian, a survivor who had once pulled Annika from death and now stood again, unwavering, at the edge of justice and truth. Riven's gaze didn't threaten. It didn't intimidate. It simply made lies impossible. There was no hiding from it, no rehearsed line that could shield him. Time seemed suspended in the room. Riven's silence said everything. Annika inhaled slowly. She knew this moment marked a shift. We have answers, she said softly, but with steel in her tone. And now it's time we ask the questions that truly matter. Riven stood. His movement was fluid, intentional. He stepped beside Annika, ready, not just to follow orders, but to walk into whatever came next. Marcus sat motionless, but in his eyes Annika saw it, the weariness of a man trapped inside the very construct he'd once believed he could control, and that gaze, Riven's gaze, would haunt him longer than any sentence could. The debrief sessions with women manipulated by Marcus Langford were held in a small, warm room, far from the noise of the outside world. Soft light fell over faces still etched with the trauma of the past. Annika sat with the investigation team, quietly recording the testimonies of the women who had once been part of the matriarchal reclamation project. Each brought with her a different story, but one truth kept returning, unmistakable. Marcus hadn't healed them. He had reprogrammed them. A middle-aged woman, voice trembling, recounted, "He told me my child wasn't dead, that they took him because I wasn't good enough. I believed him every word. He became a father figure, a teacher, a friend. But he was using me for his own agenda." A younger woman let out a breath, voice soft with regret. "I remember the therapy sessions. He showed me photos, edited videos, convincing me my child was being raised somewhere safe. I spent a whole year telling myself that lie. Each testimony was a puzzle piece. Alone, they were fragments. But when placed side by side, a full picture began to emerge. A picture of a systemized manipulation, meticulously designed. Marcus had not merely been a therapist. He had been an architect of trauma, of belief, of false hope. Annika listened closely. She saw the war within these women, between the blind faith in a resurrected child and the brutal reality of irreversible loss. One phrase kept surfacing in their words. "He made me believe my child was still alive. I couldn't tell what was real anymore." And that blurred line was what Marcus had weaponized. He didn't erase grief. He turned it into a dream so convincing, they never wanted to wake up. Later, in a dim conference room, the team sat in silence as the projector cast a faint glow across their focused faces. On screen, surveillance footage. Not cold clinical clips, but entire therapy sessions, documented, time-stamped, frame by frame. Marcus Langford's voice, gentle, calculated, filled the room. He didn't shout. He didn't force. He planted, layer by layer, word by word. He told the mothers their children weren't truly gone. He showed spliced footage of children playing in parks. Blurry photographs he presented as proof of survival. His voice, always measured, always comforting. He was brilliant at reading people, a forensic analyst said. Every sentence was engineered to earn trust, to increase dependency. The footage shifted. Marcus demonstrating memory reconstruction techniques, storytelling therapy, audio cues, imagery, guided visualization, sessions designed not to explore memory but to rewrite it. In one scene, he sat beside Evelyn Moore, whispering, "They told you your baby died. But think, Evelyn, when you fainted, do you remember seeing him, or just being told he was gone? Sometimes the truth isn't in a death certificate, it's a mother's instinct." Annika's chest tightened, not just at the words, but at how carefully they were crafted. These weren't sessions. They were scripts, and Marcus had been both director and leading man in a theater of illusion. The projector paused. Silence filled the room. Annika stood slowly, eyes scanning the others' faces tight with rage and disbelief. "This," she said, voice steady, "this is the heart of it. None of these women were unstable. They were made to doubt, made to forget what they once knew." She turned toward her team. "We used to think the patients were lost, but the one who broke them was Marcus Langford." The next clip played. Marcus, smiling faintly, told a woman, "You're not the only one they've hurt. This system, it was never made for mothers like us. But I'm here to help you take back what they stole." "It's like he was crafting a story, one they had no choice but to believe," Annika whispered. "Not just a therapist, a puppeteer, a storyteller with absolute control." Documents uncovered in the raid confirmed it. Marcus had used digital tools to fabricate videos, splice faces, modify voices. He'd created false sightings, planted data, mimicked security feeds. "We've seen the evidence," Cassandra added. "He wasn't healing wounds. He was making them deeper, and then selling the illusion of closure." Annika's gaze dropped to Riven silent beside her. He hadn't moved, but his eyes said everything. Not all scars are visible. Some wear fur. Some sit silently beside the people they protect. She saw it, in the cold sharpness of Riven's gaze, a profound understanding of who the true enemy was. "Riven knows," she whispered, "that the villain was never the grieving mothers, but the man behind the white coat." At that moment, everything became clearer than ever. This wasn't just a battle between truth and deception. It was between love and betrayal, between life and the darkness masked behind the title doctor. Annika stood before the stacks of damning documents, her eyes drifting toward a photo, Riven lying silently by Oliver's hospital bed. That image alone carried the weight of a vow. Justice was no longer enough. This was about redemption for the wounded souls lost in the system. "Last time," she told her team softly, "the system got it wrong. Mothers like Evelyn were judged too quickly, stripped of their rights because the law couldn't comprehend the depth of their grief." She remembered the buried cases, the silenced voices, the women who lost their children not because they were unfit, but because no one had the patience to understand pain without form. "But this time," she continued, "Riven helped us rewrite the story. He wasn't just a working dog. He was a witness, an instinct, a bridge to truths hidden beneath carefully crafted lies. With piercing eyes and unyielding loyalty, Riven had become a symbol of fairness, of trust, of clarity. He'd once saved Annika on the battlefield. Now he had saved something far more fragile. Hope. "Riven corrected the system," Annika said, her voice trembling. "For the first time, a forgotten truth has come to light. Those mothers whose stories were twisted will finally be seen, and children like Oliver will grow up in the light." She looked down and gently touched the fur on Riven's head. "Thank you, Riven. You're more than a K9. You're the keeper of hope for those buried too long in the dark." And in that quiet moment, beneath the soft hum of office lights and the shadows of closed case files, Annika knew this fight for truth, for justice, was far from over. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had Riven, a silent guardian, a loyal friend, and the clearest reminder that justice, when led by heart, can finally find its way home. Morning light filtered softly through the waiting room window at Dallas Children's Hospital. Annika stood quietly outside the pediatric intensive care unit, her gaze fixed on the woman entering the room. Rachel, the biological mother of little Zoe. Rachel's face was a fragile blend of worry, anticipation, and the kind of fragile hope that only grows from deep, unrelenting loss. The small bag on her shoulder looked too light to carry the weight of all the years, all the unanswered questions, and all the unhealed wounds. As she approached the hospital bed, her eyes froze at the sight of the small figure lying beneath the covers, so pale, so fragile. Every step closer felt like walking a tightrope stretched between fear and yearning. Annika felt her heart pounding. Not just because it was a reunion, but because she knew the story behind it. A journey of heartbreak, resilience, and the endless search for a daughter lost to shadows. Rachel had walked through fire to get here. She had mourned a child believed gone forever, sent letters, prayed to strangers, and clung to the barest hope that Zoe would return. And now, with her daughter lying inches away, Rachel's tears fell, not just from joy, but from the grief that still clung to every part of her being. Annika stepped forward, her voice low and steady. "Ms. Rachel," she said softly, "I'm Officer Hale. This is Riven, my partner, who helped us find Zoe." Rachel offered a faint smile, her eyes shimmering with gratitude so deep it needed no words. In that crowded hospital hallway, surrounded by quiet murmurs and the hum of machines, a sacred moment unfolded. A mother and daughter reunited, their bond untouched by time or distance. Inside the quiet hospital room, the only sounds were the gentle rhythm of the ventilator and the soft beat of a child's fragile heart. Rachel stood at Zoe's bedside, her eyes full of love and silent worry. She sat slowly, her hand reaching to brush the fine strands of hair across her daughter's forehead. Zoe stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, uncertain, cloudy, as if searching for meaning in the unfamiliar. And in that single instant, time stopped. All the lonely nights, the silent prayers, and dreams of a reunion, they condensed into this one delicate moment. Zoe furrowed her brow, then recoiled slightly, startled, unsure. But Rachel didn't flinch. She held her daughter's hand gently and whispered, "It's Mommy's Zoe. I love you so much." A flicker faint but unmistakable lit up in the child's eyes. And then, unexpectedly, Zoe shifted. No longer afraid, she stretched out her tiny arms and, with trembling effort, fell into her mother's embrace. Rachel wrapped her daughter in her arms, holding her as if she could knit together all the days they had lost, feeling every breath, every heartbeat, returning from the silence of separation. At that moment, they were whole again. Annika stood still, watching from the side. A quiet ache blossomed in her chest, the ache that comes with witnessing a miracle. This wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning, a doorway into healing, into a life where hope finally had a place to stay. And next to Zoe's bed stood Riven, silent, unmoving. He didn't bark, didn't step forward to be noticed. He simply stood, a quiet presence carved from patience and devotion. His deep eyes never left the scene in front of him. A mother holding her child for the first time in what felt like forever. Annika looked at the dog beside her, her eyes soft with reverence. Riven wasn't just a dog. He was a companion in healing. He knew when to act, and he knew when to step aside. Today, he chose silence. He chose reverence, because in love, in reunions that stitch hearts back together, sometimes the most powerful thing is simply to be there. In that moment, the soft morning light filtering through the window fell gently across Riven's fur, casting a peaceful glow amidst the echoes of chaos that once lived in this space. In silence, the dog seemed to offer his blessing to the reunion. Rachel and Zoe, now side by side, were beginning to piece together the fragments of lost time. Riven stood as the quiet guardian between a painful past and a hopeful future. Annika reached down and gently patted his head, whispering, "You did well, my friend." It was a praise for his patience, his sharp intuition, and the unconditional love he had shown to those who needed saving. The room was no longer just a place of reconnection between mother and child. It had become a testament to the power of loyalty, not only humans, but from a four-legged companion who never left their side. 1 week after the reunion, Annika received a handwritten letter. The envelope bore no return address, only the familiar neatness of someone who had written every word with care and weight. Inside, the soft curves of the handwriting carried a deep, quiet gratitude. To Officer Annika Hale and her faithful partner Riven, I'm Rachel, the mother of Zoe, the child you helped me find. I don't know how to express the depth of my gratitude. When I lost her, I thought the world had taken everything from me, my light, my faith. But it was you and that incredible dog who lit a new flame in my life. Thank you for never giving up, no matter how impossible it seemed. Thank you to Riven, not just your partner, but the guardian angel of my family." Rachel's words went on to share the smallest, most meaningful glimpses into their new life. The first time Zoe smiled again. The first time she called out, "Mommy." The quiet afternoons when Annika and Riven would stop by, offering nothing but their presence. Yet it meant everything. In her letter, Rachel described how Riven had become more than a rescue dog. He had become the anchor that helped mother and daughter feel safe in a world still full of sharp edges. "Riven didn't just save my daughter's life. He healed something inside of me too. I'll carry your kindness with me always, and I hope our story becomes a light for others, so no one has to lose hope again." Annika read every line slowly, letting the words settle like warmth in her chest. This wasn't just a thank you, it was a validation, a quiet, powerful reminder that what she and Riven were doing mattered. In a world torn by injustice and noise, some miracles are real. And sometimes, that miracle is a loyal gaze, a gentle nudge, or a bark that comes exactly when it's needed most. She folded the letter carefully and placed it on her desk, next to a photograph of Riven in his K9 officer's cap, a living symbol of unwavering loyalty and quiet strength. The desk in the airport security office remained cluttered after long hours of tension case files stacked beside digital devices, cables still coiled from the last investigation. The cold gray walls reflected the harsh glow of fluorescent lights. But amidst it all, something quiet was softening the room. A plain white sheet of paper, no stamp, no letterhead rested alone on the desk. Just a handwritten letter, the strokes round, neat, and careful. Annika stood, gently picking up the letter and bringing it closer to the small photo frame that sat beside her computer screen. A photo of Riven, her steadfast K9 partner through countless battles, silent and loyal. She paused. Her eyes scanned the letter again, slowly this time, as if each word held a story. A thank you, yes, but also a confession. A whisper of deep understanding, left behind by someone who had seen both the darkness and the light. Then, with steady hands, she reached for a thumbtack and pinned the letter to the corkboard above her desk. That spot wasn't just for reminders. It was sacred now. A marker on the path she had walked, one of trust, resilience, and unshaken loyalty. Her gaze softened. A quiet joy touched her face. Not grand, not loud, but sincere. The letter, humble and brief, had reminded her of why she kept going. Outside the window, snow still drifted across the bleak sky, pressing cold palms against the glass. But at that moment, Annika's office had never felt warmer. She sat down, resting her palm on the desk. Not for comfort, but to feel the warmth radiating from that one sheet of paper. Because Rachel's letter, the mother of Zoe, wasn't just a note of gratitude. It was fuel. A quiet fire pushing her and Riven forward into whatever came next. Beside the letter, the photo of Riven in his K9 cap caught the fading light. His gaze, even captured in stillness, looked outward, far beyond the frame, toward a horizon lined with hope. Annika smiled. She felt it, that invisible thread binding her to Riven, and to every soul they'd ever helped find their way back from silence. She read the last lines again. Rachel had written, "There are still silent souls out there like Riven, like you, guarding us through our darkest moments." The words echoed like a lullaby in Annika's mind. A hymn for those who fought in silence, for those who stood where no one watched. Riven, the voiceless one, was more than a partner. He was a sentry, a steady soul who had once waited with her under the rubble, bore wounds beside her, and still walked with her through the unknown. Not for command, not for praise, but for something deeper, an unspoken promise. She thought of the battles they'd fought together, not just to protect lives, but to protect what made those lives matter: dignity, humanity, love. These silent souls, the ones unseen, uncelebrated, were the ones who held justice upright when the world turned away. Annika thought of mothers like Rachel, of children like Zoe and Oliver, of stories lost between legal pages and medical charts, of dreams that still trembled beneath the surface, waiting to be heard. She felt the weight on her shoulders, not just that of an officer, but of a storyteller, someone tasked with giving voice to the voiceless, to make sure their truths didn't disappear in silence. That letter wasn't just thanks. It was a vow that somewhere, even in a broken world, small lights still burn, carried by silent souls who refuse to let truth or love fade. Annika breathed in deeply, her chest full of gratitude and resolve. Whatever lay ahead, hardships, storms, the unbearable unknown, she and Riven would face it together. Their faith wouldn't bend, their purpose wouldn't be broken. The afternoon light slanted through the office window, casting golden streaks across the old wooden desk. Beside the pinned letter, a small photo frame gleamed. Riven, strong, poised, wearing his officer's cap. But it wasn't just a portrait. It was a monument to loyalty, to sacrifice, to the kind of quiet strength that never seeks attention but saves lives all the same. And in that photograph, Riven looked outward still, as if watching over a road that had not yet ended. It wasn't the look of a working dog simply performing his duty. It was the gaze of a companion one who understood the weight of life and the responsibility it carried. Annika had looked at that photo many times. In every expression, every line of Riven's face, she saw a quiet power one that didn't need words to be heard. The K9 cap sat atop his head like a badge of honor, not just for service, but for something far deeper. It was a reminder. No matter how much the world changed, no matter how tangled pain and hope became, dogs like Riven would always be there, silent, steady, and unshaken. That photo had become a permanent fixture on Annika's office wall. It wasn't just decoration. It was an anchor away to remember where she'd been and prepare for the storms that were still to come. And sometimes, in the soft light of evening, Riven in that frame looked as if he too was waiting for the next soul to protect, the next story to walk into their lives. Annika knew whatever the future held, she would never walk alone. That loyal dog Riven was, more than a K9. He was her companion, her quiet protector, her constant inspiration on this long, winding road toward justice. Outside the window, the city of Dallas had settled into silence. Streetlights shimmered like scattered stars across the sleeping skyline. The airport had grown still, its day of chaos finally fading into calm. In the office, Annika placed a gentle hand on Riven's shoulder. He was seated beside her chair, relaxed, watchful as always. His eyes met hers with quiet softness and a trust that needed no words. If he could speak, Annika imagined, he'd say, "Tonight we rest." She exhaled, smiling. "Yes, Riven. There are still cases waiting. But tonight, we're allowed to breathe, to feel the peace we've earned." She looked around the room, the same walls that had held her through decisions that broke hearts and saved lives. Now, they wrapped her in stillness. Outside, the snowstorm had passed, the wind had stalled, and something in her chest softened in that shared silence, the stillness that follows every storm. Unfinished files remained. Urgent calls from other districts would come. But not now. For now she could pause. She reached down and ran her fingers through Riven's soft fur. "We did good today, you know," she whispered. "We saved lives. We gave hope to people who thought they had nothing left." Riven's tail flicked gently, as if to agree. Annika closed her eyes for a moment, letting her breath sink with the steady rhythm of the dog beside her. She thought of the mothers, the children. The stories are still waiting in the wings, but not tonight. Tonight, they had earned the right to stop, to rest, to exist in peace. "Tomorrow we go again," she murmured. "But tonight is ours." Rachel's handwritten letter still hung on the corkboard, a quiet testimony to their fight, their care, and their unyielding belief in what was right. And beneath the warm office light, Annika knew. She was never truly alone. Riven was beside her, always had been. And together, they would continue to walk this path, carrying justice, compassion, and the unbreakable bond of two silent souls who refused to give up. Phoenix Skyview Airport, once alive with boarding calls and hurried footsteps, now held a rare stillness beneath the soft light of a winter morning. Outside its main entrance, where travelers usually rushed past without pause, stood a small wooden sign, quiet, unassuming, and painted in a pale cream color. Its message, carved by hand, was simple yet profound. Believe in what seems impossible like a bark in a snowstorm. It wasn't just a quote. It was a whisper to anyone who had once doubted, once lost faith, once been pushed into silence by a world too loud or too logical. Some passengers paused to read it. A few smiled. Others stood longer, as if the words stirred something buried deeper. What they didn't know was that the phrase marked the story of Riven, the German shepherd, who once barked into a snowstorm, cutting through chaos and fear at this very airport to warn of a danger no human could see. That message wasn't just for dog lovers. It was for anyone who had ever trusted instinct over evidence, loyalty over logic, and love over fear, for anyone who still believed in something pure, even when the world tried to prove them wrong. Outside, the snow still drifted gently, veiling rooftops and lampposts in white. But inside those flakes lived an echo, a bark that had once broken through the storm to protect a life. Annika stood beside the sign, her gaze tilted towards the steel-gray sky. She knew the truth in those words, that no matter how uncertain life became, somewhere always there would be a bark in the snow. A sound of truth, of loyalty, of hope. And just a few steps away stood a statue, solid bronze, carefully sculpted, rising from a granite base. It was Riven. The shepherd stood firm, powerful yet calm. But it wasn't just his form that captured the heart. It was his posture. He stood protectively in front of a child. A small girl, barely tall enough to reach his shoulders, leaned gently against the dog's side, her face tilted upward with quiet trust. Her hand rested near his fur-sculpted, as if mid-motion, forever reaching, forever safe. This wasn't a statue. It was a moment cast in metal, a moment of unspoken love, unshakable protection, and a bond that defied explanation. People passing by didn't just glance, they stopped. Some touched the base with reverence, some lowered their heads as if in silent thanks. A mother clutching her child, an elderly couple pausing beside their luggage. Even the airport staff, used to everything moving at speed, stood still for a moment in front of Riven. Annika stood quietly beside it, her heart full and still. This statue wasn't just about loyalty. It was a testament to resilience, to have courage, to unconditional love. It reminded the world that in its darkest moments, someone or something might still be standing, protecting, watching, loving. And there he stood, Riven, his gaze cast ahead, as if guarding all who entered and left this place. He wasn't just a memory. He was a presence, an anchor in a rushing world. In that swirl of travelers, a young boy slowed. Oliver. His steps faltered when he saw the statue, Riven and the little girl beside him. He stopped. Still. drawn in by something unspoken, something remembered. Oliver stood silently before the bronze dog, every line and contour of the sculpture evoking memories of a loyal companion who had stood beside him through the darkest of days. His voice barely rose above a whisper, soft as if afraid to shatter the quiet peace that enveloped the space. "He saved me," the boy murmured. "I miss him so much." The words floated gently in the air, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, yet powerful enough to stir something deep within every heart around. Not far away, Annika watched with a tender expression. She knew this was more than a child's words. It was an acknowledgement, a quiet thank you from a soul that had once been lost, now held safe because of Riven. Oliver reached out and gently touched the base of the statue, just beneath where Riven stood tall, cast in eternal stillness like a soldier on watch. Then, turning to Annika, he took her hand, his small fingers folding into hers, sharing the sacred weight of the moment. "I know he's still with me," he said, his eyes glistening, filled with a world too big for words, one made of trust, memory, and the fragile spark of hope. The foot traffic in the terminal slowed, eyes turning toward the boy and the statue. Some smiled quietly, others wiped away tears. All could feel it, the unseen pulse of love and loyalty that transcended time. Annika looked at Oliver with pride swelling in her chest. This dog hadn't just saved a boy's life. He'd illuminated a path back to light for hearts that had once given up on dawn. The statue was not just forged metal. It was a monument to perseverance, to silent guardianship, to the miracles that spring from instinct and faith. And through the trembling voice of one child, the true meaning of this statue came alive once more. As the airport returned to its rhythm beneath the soft tones of a winter sunset, Annika stood quietly beside the bronze figure. Around her bustled travelers and noise, but beside her, Riven remained still, strong, silent, like a hero who knew his duty had been fulfilled. She and Riven exchanged a glance, no words needed. Just one look, steady and knowing, and it said everything. The trials, the sacrifice, the miracles they had walked through side by side. In her eyes, gratitude, reverence. In his, unwavering trust. Riven wasn't just a service dog. He was a companion, a partner, a quiet sentinel who had stood by her in life's fiercest storms. And in that glance, no words were needed, just presence, just understanding between two souls who had faced the unimaginable and come through together. Outside, the bronze statue stood tall, a timeless tribute to loyalty and sacrifice. It whispered to all who passed, "There are still silent spirits in this world, fighting, protecting, loving in ways that need no explanation." Annika sighed softly and placed a hand gently on Riven's fur. She knew there would be more trials, but she also knew this. She would never walk alone. They had weathered snowstorms, shadows, and silence. And now, with just a glance, they gave each other the strength to go on. In this life, love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it lingers in a gaze, in a touch, in a single bark from a dog like Riven, a German shepherd, not just strong and intelligent, but with a heart vast enough to hold the burdens of those he loved. The story of Annika and Riven is not simply one of survival. It is one of salvation. It reminds us that even the smallest souls can heal the deepest wounds, that the bond between human and animal can become a lifeline, that through love, justice, and faith, light can break through the thickest dark. This is not just a tale of light triumphing over darkness. It is a call to cherish the silent ones around us, the ones who don't ask to be seen, but who save us all the same. May Riven's story live on as a quiet inspiration. To live with kindness, to love without condition, and to believe in what the world calls impossible. Because sometimes the miracle is already beside us, waiting for us to believe.